Okay, so today we are going to factor using the distributive property. And so the first part is just remembering how to distribute. We've done 6x squared y to the third times negative 5x. That's negative 30 x to the third y to the third. Notice that x squared and the x make an x to the third when you multiply them. Now let's multiply the outside term times 3z.
18x squared y to the third z.
Thank you. And then we'll do the last one. 6x squared y to the third times 2y to the fifth. X squared and then just y to the eighth. Very good. So this is the answer when we have distributed that outside term. Any questions on that? All right, then let's go ahead and review what we did on letter B. This is what we did yesterday with greatest common factor. Thank you. So let's go ahead and break down the 12. When we break down the 12, we have 3 times 4. And then the 4 is 2 times 2. The way that we did it yesterday is we kept, yes?
Do I need to?
We're just copying. You're just copying.
Okay.
I mean, we're just reviewing right now.
All right.
In that first factor tree, make sure that you're bringing down anything that isn't that is prime. We need to keep bringing those prime numbers down so that it can be on the last level, because it's the last level that we look at. Okay. We also have 5 x's, 2 y's, and a z. All right, then this 14 can break down to 2 times 7, 3 x's, 4 y's, 3 z's. And then this one can break to 5 and 3, 2 x's, 3 y's, 4 z's. Okay. So now what we do is we figure out what do they all have in common. Do they all have a 3?
No.
Do they all have a 2?
Yes. No.
No, so there's not a number that is common to all of them. So we need to see what letters are common to all of them.
2 y. 2 x.
There's 2 x's. So we'll write down 2 x's in our answer. And then there are 2 y's, I heard. And 1 z. Very good. And as long as you're circling them as you go, that will help you for what we're doing today. So the greatest common factor here would be, how do we write x times x? X squared, y times y, y squared, and then just z. That is our greatest common factor. Okay. Now let's look at the next part. It says, remember that factors are terms multiplied together to make the product. Find the missing factors. So you'll notice that you have something here in parentheses, and it is being multiplied by an unknown term, and it's equal to 24a to the 5th m to the 9th. And we have to figure out what goes in where that question mark is to make that statement true. So we're going to kind of break it down a little bit for now. We have 6 times what gives you 24? 4. Then we're going to look at the a. A squared times what gives you a to the 5th? A cubed, good. We have 2 a's to begin with. We need 5 a's, so that means we need 3 more. Right here there are 2 a's to begin with. We need 5 a's. That means we have a to the 3rd left. All right, then we have an m. We need to multiply that by something to get m to the 9th. So what is that going to be? M to the 8th. Okay, so what we're going to look at now then is what is in the parentheses. That is what we had to multiply to get that answer. So that whole term would be 4a to the 3rd, m to the 8th. That is the missing factor.
There's a different one.
Yeah, there's several ways to do these. Yeah. Did you divide?
No. No, I did the little tree thing. The greatest common factor method or whatever.
Okay, you can do the greatest common factor of this one and figure out what's left. You can do that. There's not really a greatest common factor, but you could do this all out and then see where your 6 is and see what's left from that. That's definitely a way that you could do it. All right, let's go on to letter B. Same thing, even though they're reversed. We still want to figure out 5. 5 times what will give you negative 25. A negative 5. Then x to the third times what will give you x to the fourth?
X.
Just x, good. And y times what will give you y to the sixth? Y to the fifth. So that means that what's missing is that negative 5xy to the fifth. That is your missing factor. Any questions on that? Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take all 3 of these parts and put them together into one problem. Okay? It says now let's factor. We will use our distributive property to factor the polynomials. This is one of many methods of factoring. When using the distributive property to factor, here are the steps you must follow. Find the greatest common factor of all the terms first, and this will be what goes in the front of the parentheses and what multiplies. Number 2 says the remaining factor parts go inside the parentheses. So this is how your answer will look. You will have the greatest common factor outside the parentheses, and you will have the remaining factor parts inside the parentheses. So this is how all of your answers will look for the new stuff today. Greatest common factor is outside, and then the remaining factor parts are inside. Then it says find the missing factor. So let's see what we have. This is different from what we did at the top, because at the top we just had monomials. Right now we have a binomial that we're trying to get to. Okay, so this is our greatest common factor. This is our remaining factor parts right here, and this is our final answer. So what we're going to do is use the distributive property to help us. Now, how many terms is our answer? 2. That means that there should be 2 terms inside the parentheses that we're going to have here. Okay? So let's do the first one. We say negative 3x times what will give me 12x squared? 4x. Is it 4x?
Yes.
Negative 3 times 4 gives you 12?
Negative 4x.
Negative 4x. Good. So we're going to put a negative 4x right here. Now we'll do the second part of it. Negative 3x times what will give you negative 18x? Just 6. So that's what will go here, and we'll put a plus to separate them. So the missing factor here then would be negative 4x plus 6. You see what we did? Say negative 3x is our greatest common factor times what will give us the answer.
How did we know that there had to be 2 different factors or lines?
Right here, because the answer has 2.
Okay.
So in order for the answer to have 2, we have to have 2 here that we're multiplying to.
And so we're going to be 3, in that parentheses, or more than 2?
Look right here. This one has 3, so then inside the parentheses we'll have 3. Okay?
So what's your greatest common factor on this?
The greatest common factor on that one was a negative 3x. They already gave it to you.
But what about the ones on the...
On the bottom, we've got to find the greatest common factor on these. Yes. So that's where we're putting everything together now. The first step will be to find the greatest common factor. Then the second step will be to write out your answer with your greatest common factor in your parentheses, and you have to figure out what you have to multiply by to get the answer. And this is kind of like working backwards. Where they're giving us the answer, we have to find out what 2 things multiply to get that answer. Okay? So let's go ahead and do that. The very first step it tells us is to find the greatest common factor. So let's go ahead and break it down. 15 gets broken down to 3 times 5, and then we have an x there. And then the 25 gets broken down to 5 times 5, and we have 2 x's. This is where writing very neatly and being very organized in what you're doing is key, okay? Because if you're not organized and you're not neat, then it's going to get all jumbled up and it's going to be very messy and you're not going to be able to find what you need to find. So as we're looking at these two things, what do they have in common? They have a 5 and they also have an x. So there's our greatest common factor. Okay? That's our first step. Our second step says to write the remaining factor parts inside the parentheses. So we're going to put our 5x outside, and then we're going to write our parentheses. And how many terms are going to be inside the parentheses? 2. So now what we need to do is distribute and figure out what we need inside there. 5x times what will give us 15x? 3. 5x times what will give us 25x squared? 5x. And that's going to be a plus 5x. Now let me show you something. Look at what we have here. The 5x right here, that goes for the greatest common factor, right? Look at what's left over. Do you see that 3 that's left over right here in the tree? Look at where it is. It's inside the parentheses. Okay? Look at this greatest common factor. Here it is. 5 and this x is the greatest common factor. What's left over? 5 and x.
Oh, so you just put whatever's left over in the parentheses.
As long as you're being very careful and organized and you're writing it down and you have everything on that last line like I've been telling you to do, then everything that's left over that you haven't circled for the greatest common factor will go in your parentheses. And then you can just double check that you've done it right by going back and redistributing. 5x times 3 is 15x. 5x times 5x is 25x squared. So your answer is this, all of this. The greatest common factor and the remaining factor parts.
So like if there's y's and like z's and all that, so it would really be like 3xy's or 3xyz.
It could be.
It could be.
Yeah. All right, so let's go ahead and try the next one. On the next one, we have negative 8. How do we start that one? Good. Negative 1, 8. Then the 8 can be broken to 2 times 4, and that negative 1 has to come down. And then we can get rid of that first level. Then the 4 can be broken down, and we need to bring down the 2 and the negative 1. And then this level can be taken out. And then we've also got a B and 2 C's. Everybody good on that one? Notice how for each level I've marked out the level that I'm not using anymore. And that's very important when you try to figure out what's left. Okay? All right, so for the negative 24, I have negative 1 times 24. The 24 can be broken. Let's do 6 times 4. And so that level goes away. The 6 and the 4 still can be broken. So 2 times 3, 4 times 2, and then that negative 1 still needs to come down. And then we have a B and a C. All right. So now it's time to do the greatest common factor. What do they all have in common? They have a negative 1, and then they have a 2, and another 2, and another 2. Does everybody see that they have 3 2's? Yes? Okay, what else do they have in common?
B.
A B and a C. All right, so in all, my greatest common factor is negative 8BC. But remember, that was what we did yesterday, so we need to keep going. And we know that we need to keep going because this is a polynomial, not just two things with a comma in between. That's how we know that we have to keep going. Okay? So, we'll write out our negative 8b, c, and then in parentheses, how many terms are we going to have? 2. So now let's distribute. Negative 8bc times what will give me negative 8bc squared?
1C.
Just a c. You could put a 1 if you want, just a c or a 1c. And notice what's left over. What we did not circle, there was a c, right?
But how do you put the 1?
You can always put a 1 in there. You can always multiply something by 1, and it will never change it.
Because I knew that you had to use the 1 for like the negative 8, but I didn't know like if it was.
Well, it's important because like if we had all of these circled, we would have to have something there. And so if let's say that this C was circled, then we would have to have a 1 there, just as a place marker, because we have to have 2 terms in the answer because there were 2 terms to begin with. Okay? So that's why it would maybe be important just to put a 1 for the time being. Okay? All right, so then now we need to do negative 8bc times what will give me negative 24bc? 3. And we need a plus in between. And notice that of all the things that are circled, there is a 3 left over. Okay? Yes.
How will we know if we don't have to like do it like a minus in between?
See, we've used the negative here. If we don't use the negative, then you would have a minus right there.
Oh.
So like if this was not a negative 1, then this negative 1 would not be circled, and then you would have to put a minus 3 instead. Okay? So if there is a negative in there at all, then that's going to indicate whether it's a plus or a minus. Okay? Since this one did not have a negative, we just put a plus 3. Let's go on to letter C.
Miss Gibbs,
Yes.
when you answer, do you have to put the other 2 terms on the other side? Or can you just write it like that?
I'm sorry, which 2 terms are you talking about?
Like the first 2, like negative 8b.
This is a greatest common factor, and you have to have that. Otherwise, you've not factored at all.
Okay, but like when you... Never mind.
So when you answer it, it needs to include the greatest common factor plus what was remaining.
But you don't have to write like the other 2 original terms after?
These, no, you don't have to write those again.
Okay.
No, you do not have to write those again. All right, let's go on to C. We can break down the 2 to 1 times 2. There's 2 x's. 6 is 2 times 3 with 1 x. And 4 is just 2 times 2. So what do they all 3 have in common? Just 1, 2, correct? So then let's write it out. Now, how many terms will we have inside the parentheses?
3.
There are 3 terms inside the parentheses because there were 3 terms to begin with. All right, so let's figure this out. 2 times what will give me 2x squared? X squared. You could put 1x squared, that's okay. 2 times what will give me 6x? 3x. What do I need right here? A plus. You always have to have the separators. And then 2 times what will give me 4? 2. And we need a plus right there. So your answer is 2, and then in the parentheses we have another polynomial. Tomorrow we will learn how to factor that, what's inside.
Does it just get more complicated like once we keep going?
I'm not going to say complicated, I'm going to say that there are more steps. All right, letter D. Let's get started on factoring these out with the factor tree. 2 times 3 for the 6, and then there's 1a and 2 b's. Negative 15, we start out with the negative 1. Then the 15 can break. We just need to remember to bring down that negative 1 and cross out that first level. And then we have 2 a's and 2 b's. And then for the negative 27, we have negative 1 times 27. The 27 can break to 3 times 9. And then we can cross out that first level. Am I done, or do I need to keep going?
The 9 can be broken down.
9 can break down to 3 times 3. Bring down the 3, bring down the negative 1. And then we have 1a and 3 b's. All right, so greatest common factor time.
3.
There's a 3 that's in common,
A.
and an a,
2 B's.
2 b's. So that means that our greatest common factor is 3ab squared. Good. And I don't need to circle that. All right, so now we take that 3ab squared, and we have to make our parentheses. How many terms are we going to have? 3. All right, so 3ab squared times what will give me 6ab squared? 2. Notice the 2 is there by itself. 3ab squared times negative 15a squared b squared.
Minus
Negative 5a. Just negative 5a? Okay, because that's all that's left. Negative 1 times 5 is a negative 5. And Abby, this is where you'll know. You see how this one, there's a negative 1 and a 5. That makes it a minus 5.
Okay.
And then you got an a left over. Then 3ab squared times what gives me negative 27ab to the third? Negative 9b. And so that would be our final answer. Questions?